Hi guys, cinematic recap here. Before we start, warning. Spoilers ahead. Today, I'm gonna explain an American biographical drama movie starring Will Smith, called King Richard. The movie tells the story of Richard Williams, a former tennis athlete in California. He lives with his wife, Brandy, his 3 stepdaughters, Tunda, Aisha, Lindrea, and his 2 daughters, Venus and Serena. Since retiring, his only goal has been to support her 2 daughters to become the world's greatest professional tennis athletes. Even he has prepared a plan for their success since before they were born. It can be seen that he tries to talk to some tennis coaches to train his daughters. Although he is always rejected, he still does not give up on finding the best tennis coach for her daughters. One day, Richard takes all of his daughters to the park, where he can train Venus and Serena every day. While Tunda is studying, she is suddenly harassed by a group of thugs. Knowing this, Richard immediately tells the girls to get back on the bus and confront the thugs, telling them to stop harassing his daughters. However, the thugs do not heed his warning, they even punches and kicks Richard. When they get home, Brandy greets them all warmly. After their training, it is Richard's turn to work as a security guard every night, while Brandy works as a nurse during the day. At work, Richard is reading a sports magazine and accidentally finds an article about a famous tennis coach. Therefore, he has the idea to promote his daughter's skills. The following morning, Richard meets the famous tennis coach and then presents him a video showing Venus and Serena's amazing skills. Unfortunately, the coach also turns him down and explains that if they do not have money, then they cannot become professional athletes, no matter how great their skills are. That night, Richard broods in the middle of the tennis court alone after taking his family out to dinner. Not long after, the thugs appear out of nowhere to taunt him again. At first, he tries to walk away from them, but he starts to lose his temper when they say rude comments to Tunda. Richard immediately hits one of the thugs with a racket, but his friends start to beat him. Luckily, they decide to leave Richard alone because they think no one will care about him. Richard then returns home battered, while Brandy focuses on treating his wounds, as if this incident has happened to her husband over and over again. The next day, Richard takes Venus and Serena to see Coach Paul Cohen, as he plans to show him their skills in person. They find Paul in the middle of practicing with John McEnroe and Pete Sampras. Despite his initial hesitation, Paul eventually agrees to watch the girls practice. He hits a few balls with Venus, and then he is really impressed by her skills. Since Richard cannot afford professional coaching, Paul is only interested in coaching Venus for free. Therefore, Richard takes Venus to be coached by Paul, while Serena continues to train with him and Brandy. Before leaving for practice, Venus reassures Serena that she does not need to worry because their father will record all of Venus's practices with Paul, so Serena can learn from the recording. After they finish practicing, Paul shows Richard and Venus a video of Jennifer Capriati, which makes Richard even more interested in registering Venus in the juniors tournament. He feels this is the first step so that the world can see Venus's shrewdness in playing. For months, Venus spends her days constantly training until the day of the junior tournament arrives. Richard's entire family also comes to support her against all her opponents in the tournament. She subsequently beats all of them and ends up winning the tournament, but Richard insists on Venus and her sisters to stay humble despite their success. One night after their practice in the park, Richard comes home with Venus and Serena to meet some agents from social services. They were called to the house after receiving reports that Richard was abusing his daughters to practice tennis every day. Richard then evades by proving that the girls are fine and they are getting enough attention from their family. Hence, the agents decide to leave their homes after they fall silent hearing Richard's explanation and have no evidence for the allegations. In one of Venus' next tournaments, Serena also registers to play in the tournament without Richard knowing. After a while, someone comes to greet Richard and says that he is very impressed watching Serena's match on another court. After hearing those words, Richard walks with Brandy to watch her match. At first, Serena thinks that she would be scolded by her parents for secretly registering for the tournament without their permission. However, Richard actually acknowledges her that she is just as great as Venus and then tells her to continue the match until the end. Long story short, Venus wins first place while Serena wins second place in the tournament. News of her 2 daughters' victory spread throughout America. The girls are even invited to be speakers in schools to inspire young people to use their youth with positive activities. Meanwhile, Paul introduces Richard to high-profile sport agents, George MacArthur and Laird Stabler. At first, their meeting goes very smoothly, until Richard feels that his family are being treated as outsiders among the predominantly white, upper-class competition. Because of that, Richard chooses to walk away from them. Paul then speaks to Richard and Brandy about the incident just now. Richard decides to pull his daughters out of the junior circuit entirely because he fears that his daughters will be taken advantage of. On the other hand, Paul warns him that his decision will destroy the girls' chances to become professional athletes, but Richard stands firm and ultimately fires Paul as coach. Since then, Richard contacts Rick Macy to be the new coach of Venus and Serena. Afterwards, the new coach travels to California to see the girls play. While testing the two of them, Rick is very impressed with their skills. Thus, he offers them a chance to train at his facility in Florida. Not only that, Rick will also take care of all the needs of Richard's family in Florida later, even to give Richard a new job. However, Richard has the final agreement by reaffirming that the girls will not play junior tournament, instead training and attending school like normal children. Although Rick initially resents his wish, Richard and his family eventually move to Florida with the exception of Tunda, as she is focusing on her studies in college and her life is already there. In the ensuing 3 years, Venus and Serena never compete in a tournament at all, instead they focus on practicing as usual. At that moment, Richard still thinks his daughters are not ready to compete in the tournament. Once during her training, Venus suddenly tells Rick that she wants to become a professional athlete. He initially refuses because he knows that Richard will not allow it. After Venus keeps begging him and putting on a sad face, he is forced to persuade Richard and tells him about a tournament in Oakland, where they can let Venus to compete. Richard reluctantly agrees, but then reneges upon seeing a news report about one of Rick's students, Jennifer Capriati, who is allegedly suffering from burnout and has been arrested for drug possession. He is worried that Venus will suffer a similar fate to her. Because of this, Richard takes his family to Disney World, which obviously confuses Rick because the girls miss their practice that day. When they get home, Rick angrily confronts Richard why he canceled his daughter's practice. He finally tells Rick that he does not want the girls to end up like Jennifer. Hearing this, Rick retaliates, saying that Richard continues to do everything for himself, while pretending it is all for his daughters. Meanwhile, Venus overhears their conversation and then she walks out of the house in frustration. Brandy also argues with Richard in the kitchen, where she says he should have discussed with his family first before making a decision. In fact, he never even asks Venus what she wants. Later, he practices with Venus in the evening while she insists that she wants to compete in the tournament. He then reconciles with Venus and tells of his past when he was a child in Shreveport. He accidentally touched a white man's hand. Because of that, the man started beating him along with his friends. Unfortunately, his father ran away when Richard asked for his help. Since then, he has promised that he will never run away from her children and will always protect them forever. He realizes that his past trauma has made Venus tormented, and from now on he will continue to support Venus's decision to compete in the tournament. Soon, the family heads to Oakland for the tournament, but before the tournament begins, they meet with an agent from a well-known sports brand who wants to offer them a major sponsorship deal worth $3 million. Unexpectedly, the family collectively agrees to turn down the offer, but then Rick urges them to accept anyway. Venus then tells Rick that she wants the agent to see how really good she is. The family also believes that once Venus starts to play in the tournament, she will attract more lucrative offers because of her skills in playing tennis. Moreover, they are surprised by Tunda, who also shows up for the competition to support her sister. Venus plays against Shawn Stafford in her first professional match. Even though she has to fight hard, she finally wins after being encouraged by all of her family. Later, Rick learns that Venus will face the top-seeded, Arantxa Sanchez Vicario. Furthermore, the previous agent increases his offer to $4 million. Therefore, he urges Richard to accept the offer now because he is not sure that Venus can beat Vicario. If that happens, then the offer will be cancelled. Rick hopes that this second opportunity is not wasted, but again Richard does not want to accept the offer because he still believes in his daughter to win the tournament. Before the next match, Richard finds Serena alone staring at the court. He knows that Serena is jealous of Venus' success. He then cheers her on, saying that she will also become the greatest tennis athlete of all time in the next few years. The day of the final match finally arrives. Venus braids her hair before the final match and steps out onto the court confidently to face Vicario. She initially takes the first set and leads in the second, which infuriates her opponent. Thus, Vicario suddenly takes an extended bathroom break, which she does on purpose so that the crowd will watch Venus alone in the middle of the court, making her even more nervous. When Vicario returns to the court, she manages to recover and eventually wins the match against Venus. Back in the locker room, Richard and Brandy comfort a dejected Venus and tells her to be proud of herself. When the family leaves the stadium, they are very surprised to find a large crowd of supporters waiting to cheer her on and see her as the champion for them. In the end, Rick also tells Richard that several major shoe companies are anxious to meet with Venus after seeing her amazing skills. The epilogue reveals that 9 months later, at the age of 15, Venus would sign a contract with Reebok for $12 million. Richard still put their education and family above competing. At the age of 41, Venus would go on to win Wimbledon 5 times and become the first African-American woman to be ranked number 1 in the world during the Open era. On the other hand, Serena, who joined Venus as a professional athlete 2 years later, also became a 23-time Grand Slam champion and is considered to be the greatest player in tennis history, just like Richard predicted. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.